My family cut me off for 10 years. They told me I was ungrateful, unstable, and that I would crawl back begging within a month. Last Tuesday, they walked through the front door of my medical spa without an appointment, and my father sat down in the consultation lobby like he owned the place. He had absolutely no idea how right he was. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old. I am the founder and sole owner of Serenova Medical Spa, a luxury wellness clinic in downtown Atlanta that has been booked solid for the past 3 years. Our waiting list runs 6 weeks long. We have been featured in Atlanta Magazine twice. I have 12 full-time employees, who I pay above market rate, because I know exactly what it feels like to work yourself to the bone for someone who does not see your value. Before I tell you what happened last Tuesday, I need you to understand what happened 10 years ago, because the two nights are connected in ways my family never anticipated. I was 22 years old and living at home while finishing my aesthetics and nursing certifications. I was paying my parents $300 a month in rent, buying my own groceries, and working double shifts at a hotel spa on weekends to save money. My younger brother had just turned 25, and he had run up nearly $40,000 in gambling debts to some very serious people. My father came to me with a solution. He wanted me to take out a personal loan in my name to cover it. He told me it was a family emergency. He told me I owed them for everything they had given me growing up. I said no. I said no because I had spent my entire life watching my brother make reckless decisions and watching my parents absorb every single consequence for him. I said no because that loan would have destroyed my credit for a decade and ended any chance I had of building something of my own. I said no because for once in my life, I chose myself. My father told me to pack my things by morning. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing. My brother sat on the couch playing video games and did not look up once. I put everything I owned into 4 garbage bags and drove to my friend's apartment in a car that needed 2 quarts of oil just to make the trip. It was February. It was 38 degrees. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes before I let myself cry. And then I drove away and I did not look back. Not once. The first 3 years were brutal in ways I do not have enough words to describe. I worked 2 jobs, slept 6 hours a night on a pull-out couch, ate rice and canned beans more times than I can count, and took every free online course I could find on business finance, real estate law, and medical aesthetics. I found a mentor named Dr. Patricia Owens, a 60-year-old dermatologist who had built a small empire of wellness clinics across the Southeast before retiring. She saw something in me during a professional development seminar and took me under her wing completely. She taught me how to read commercial leases. She taught me how to negotiate vendor contracts. She co-signed my first business loan when no bank would look at me seriously, and she spent 4 years helping me build Serenova from a single-room suite I rented inside an existing salon into the full clinic it is today. When Dr. Owens passed away 2 years ago, she left me something in her will that changed everything. She left me the building. Not just the suite I was renting. The entire 4-story building on Peachtree Street that housed my clinic on the first floor, 2 other small businesses on the second, a physical therapy practice on the third, and a corporate office suite on the 4th floor currently occupied by my brother's employer, a regional franchise consulting company where he had been working as a mid-level account manager for the past 3 years. I had known for approximately 14 months that my brother worked in my building. I chose to say nothing. I had my attorney process the deed transfer quietly. I had the property management company handle all tenant communications under the name Solis Properties LLC. Nobody in that building, including my brother, had any reason to connect their landlord to the quiet woman running a spa on the first floor. I went about my business, paid my own rent to myself as a formality, and waited for the day that information would become relevant. Last Tuesday it became very relevant. I was in the middle of a staff meeting when my front desk coordinator knocked on the conference room door with an expression that told me something had gone sideways in the lobby. She leaned in close and whispered that there was a family there asking for me by name, not as a client. As a relative, I took a slow breath, thanked her, and asked her to offer them water and tell them I would be right out. I finished the last 3 minutes of my meeting. I straightened my lab coat. I walked out to the lobby. My father was sitting in one of the white linen reception chairs, with his legs crossed like he was waiting for a table at a restaurant. He was wearing a gray blazer, and the kind of watch that men buy to make other men ask about it. My mother sat beside him, clutching her purse in both hands, wearing a practiced expression of warm concern that I recognized immediately as her opening performance. My brother stood near the window with his arms crossed, scrolling his phone, not bothering to look up. His wife stood next to him in a wrap dress that still had the price tag tucked into the inner seam where she had forgotten to cut it. 10 years. Not one phone call. Not one text. Not a birthday card. Not a holiday message. Nothing. 10 years of absolute silence from the people who raised me. And my father looked up at me from that chair the way you look at a contractor who shows up late. I kept my face completely neutral and walked to the front desk. My father stood, buttoning his blazer. He opened with my name in the tone of someone who believes they are doing you a favor by acknowledging you exist. He said he hoped I had a few minutes because they had driven a long way, and this was important. I told him I had a clinic to run, but I could give him 15 minutes. I asked my coordinator to take them to consultation room 3. The room was clean and white with good lighting and 2 chairs across from a small desk. I pulled the door shut behind me and sat down. My father remained standing for a moment longer than necessary before taking the chair across from me. My mother sat beside him. My brother leaned against the wall. His wife examined the product display on the counter like she was browsing at Sephora. My father got right to it. He told me that my brother and his wife were expecting their first child. He told me that they had been trying to purchase a franchise license for a supplement retail concept and that the opportunity was time-sensitive. He told me that the buy-in required a capital investment of $125,000. He told me that given how well my business was clearly doing, the least I could do was step up for my family. He used the phrase "the least I could do" 3 separate times in under 2 minutes. My mother nodded along at every pause and added that she hoped I had found some peace over the years and that whatever had happened between us, I needed to remember that family is family. She said the word family 5 times in 4 sentences. My brother finally looked up from his phone. He had aged in the way that men who avoid accountability tend to age. Soft around the jaw, tired around the eyes, carrying a low-grade resentment in his expression like permanent weather. He told me this was not charity. He told me it was an investment. He said that once the franchise was up and running, he would pay me back within 3 years, and he would give me a 10% stake in the business as a thank you. His wife turned from the product display and said that, honestly, this was a very generous offer and that most investors would kill for that kind of return from a proven franchise model. She said it the way people say things when they have rehearsed it in the car on the way over. I looked at all 4 of them. I asked my father one question. I asked him why he believed I owed him anything at all. He leaned forward and told me that he had raised me. He told me he had put a roof over my head and food on the table for 22 years, and that the way I walked out on this family was one of the most selfish things he had ever witnessed. He said that my success, whatever it was, would not have been possible without the foundation they gave me. He said that holding on to a grudge over one disagreement was childish and that I needed to grow up. One disagreement. That was what he called it. The night he told me to choose between destroying my financial future and sleeping on the street, he called it one disagreement. My mother's eyes filled with tears on cue. She said she just wanted her daughter back. She said she had missed me every single day. She said that a baby was coming and it would be a shame for that child to grow up not knowing their aunt. I noticed she did not apologize. Not one word of apology from any of them. My brother's wife picked up one of the facial serums from the display, looked at the price, and set it back down with an expression that communicated she found it overpriced. She asked if I gave family discounts. I told them I needed a moment and stepped out of the consultation room. I walked to my office at the end of the hall, sat down, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the current tenant file for the 4th floor. My property manager had forwarded me a note 3 weeks earlier, flagging that my brother's employer, the franchise consulting firm, had missed their last 2 rent payments and had been formally notified of delinquency. They were currently 30 days from triggering the default clause in their commercial lease. If they defaulted, I had the right to terminate. I read through the file carefully. Then I read the franchise model my brother had described in the consultation room. I ran a quick search and found it in under 4 minutes. The supplement franchise he was describing had an F rating with the Better Business Bureau, 17 pending civil complaints from former franchisees, and a class action lawsuit filed in Florida claiming the company had systematically misrepresented projected revenues to investors. I sat with that information for a moment. Then I closed my laptop, smoothed my coat, and walked back to consultation room 3. I sat down and told them I had thought about it. My father's posture relaxed slightly. My mother pressed her hands together. My brother uncrossed his arms. His wife turned fully from the counter. I told them I was not going to give them $125,000. The relaxed posture disappeared. My father's jaw tightened. He asked me to repeat myself. I told him I had looked up the franchise they were describing, and I told them exactly what I found. I read the BBB rating out loud. I mentioned the lawsuit. I explained that 17 franchisees had filed complaints stating the company's revenue projections were fabricated and that multiple owners had lost their entire investments within the first 18 months. My brother pushed off the wall. He told me I did not know what I was talking about. He said I had clearly just done a 30-second search and was cherry-picking bad information to justify not helping him. He said the lawsuit was from disgruntled people who did not follow the business model correctly. He said his company had done thorough due diligence and that I was being paranoid. His wife nodded and said that actually their financial advisor had reviewed everything and it looked very solid. My father cut both of them off. He looked at me and said that my refusal to support this family was a pattern and that it had been a pattern my entire life. He said I had always prioritized myself over the people who loved me. He said that my business was doing well because I had been lucky and that luck ran out, and that when it did, I would regret burning every bridge behind me. Then he leaned forward and said something that he clearly believed was his strongest card. He told me he knew the building I was in. He told me he had connections in Atlanta commercial real estate and that he was aware the previous owner had passed away and the property had changed hands recently. He told me that the new ownership group, some LLC he had never heard of, was known for being aggressive with tenants, and that my lease situation here might be less stable than I realized. He said he had friends who knew how to make things difficult for small business owners who did not have the right relationships. He said he was trying to help me understand my position before things became complicated. He said this to me inside a building that I owned. I looked at him for a long moment. I asked him who had told him about the ownership change. He said he had his sources. He said the commercial real estate world in Atlanta was smaller than people thought and that he played golf with people who knew people. I told him that was very interesting. I reached over to the small credenza beside my desk and opened the lower drawer. I pulled out a manila folder and set it on the desk between us. Inside was a single document. I slid it across to him without opening it and told him to read the top line. He picked it up. He read it. He set it back down very slowly. It was the deed to the building. My name was on it. My LLC, Solis Properties, was listed as the sole managing entity. The transfer date was printed clearly. The address was printed clearly. My mother made a small sound. My brother's wife stopped pretending to look at the product display. I told my father that there was no LLC he had never heard of. There was just me. I had owned this building for 22 months. His sources, whoever they were, had not done a thorough job. He stared at the document. I watched him try to reconstruct a position from the rubble of what he had just said. His face went through several things in quick succession: confusion, then calculation, then a version of recovery that I recognized from childhood as the look he wore when he was about to reframe a failure as a strategy. He told me that this was actually wonderful news. He said that my owning the building made the whole conversation even simpler. He said I was clearly more successful than he had realized and that the investment he was asking for was genuinely nothing to someone in my position. He said he was proud of me. He used the word proud. He had not spoken to me in 10 years, and he sat in my building and told me he was proud of me as a negotiating tactic. My mother reached across and touched my arm and said that she had always known I would do something remarkable, and that she hoped I could see that this family moment was a chance to close an old wound for all of them. I pulled my arm back gently, and I told her I was glad she mentioned closing wounds. I told her there was something I needed to address before we went any further. I told them that I knew my brother's employer was a tenant in this building. I had known for over a year. I told them I had not made an issue of it because I run a professional operation and I do not mix personal history with business. I told them, however, that the company on the fourth floor had missed the last 2 rent payments, that they were in formal delinquency, that under the terms of their commercial lease, they were currently 30 days from default, which would trigger my right to terminate the tenancy. My brother went very still. I told him that I was not sharing this to threaten him. I was sharing it because, if he was planning to invest his family savings and his wife's maternity money into a franchise, he should probably know that his job might not exist in 30 days. I suggested he have a direct conversation with his employer about the company's financial health before making any irreversible decisions. My brother's wife turned to him with an expression that was no longer carefully composed. She asked him what that meant. She asked if he had known. He told her it was complicated. She asked him when he found out. He said it was not a big deal. She said that they had been budgeting for the franchise investment based entirely on his salary continuing, and that if his salary stopped, they had nothing. My father told them both to stop. He turned back to me and told me that even if the fourth floor situation was complicated, that had nothing to do with the ask he had brought to me today. He said I had clearly built real wealth and real assets. He said he was not leaving empty-handed. He said that I could either help this family voluntarily, or he would make sure the people he knew understood that I was not the kind of business owner who valued community relationships, and that Atlanta's professional networks were very small and very long-memoried. I asked him if he was threatening me. He said he was explaining reality to me. I told him I wanted to show him one more thing. I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. On the screen was a building profile from the Commercial Property Records database. The address was the office building where my father had worked for 11 years as an insurance underwriter. He had told my mother about his job the way men like him always tell their families about their jobs, as if the building itself was an extension of his identity, as if the parking space with his name on it was a credential. I told him I had run a search while I was out of the room. That building had been listed for acquisition 6 weeks ago. The sale was pending. The buyer was listed as a private investment group. My father's expression shifted. I told him the buyer was Solis Properties. The room became very quiet. I told him the acquisition was expected to close in 18 days. I told him that as part of the standard due diligence process, my team had reviewed the existing tenant roster. I told him his firm, a small underwriting office of 9 people, was on a month-to-month agreement that had been rolling over since their original 5-year lease expired the previous spring. Month-to-month meant 30 days' notice was all that was legally required to end the tenancy. My mother pressed her hand flat against her collarbone. My brother looked at his shoes. My father was silent for the first time since they had arrived. I told him I had not known he worked there when I made the offer on the building. I had identified it as a sound investment based on location, structure, and occupancy rate. His name on the fourth-floor tenant manifest was something I discovered during the title search. I had flagged it to my attorney as something to note and moved forward with the acquisition because it was a good deal, independent of anything personal. I told him that none of what I was saying was a threat. I told him I ran my properties professionally and I had no current intention of disrupting any tenants who were current on their obligations. Month-to-month tenants in good standing were offered the opportunity to sign new long-term agreements at market rate. But I also told him that I needed him to understand something clearly, the same way he had wanted me to understand something clearly when I was 22 years old standing outside in February with 4 garbage bags. I told him that I had built everything he was sitting in the middle of without $1, one phone call, or one single moment of support from this family. I told him that the foundation they gave me was being thrown out of the house in winter, and that I had used that foundation to learn exactly how to make sure no one could ever do that to me again. I told him that I did not owe them an investment. I did not owe them a loan. I did not owe them a family discount on a serum or a seat at a table I had built from scratch. I told my mother that I saw her tears and I wanted her to hear me carefully. I told her that a mother who watches her child be put out in the cold and says nothing is not a victim of her circumstances. She is a participant in the harm. I told her that the story she had been telling herself for 10 years, the one where I was the one who walked away, was not the true story, and that I needed her to stop telling it, at least in my presence. My brother's wife looked at her husband. She asked him quietly why he had never told her the full story of why his sister was estranged. He said it was complicated. She looked at him a moment longer, and then she stopped asking questions, which I understood to mean she already knew the answer was not going to be complicated at all. My brother looked at me for the first time since they had sat down, not the dismissive glance from earlier, a real look. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me if I was actually going to terminate his job. I told him that what I was going to do was run my properties in accordance with my legal agreements. I told him that if his employer came current on their rent obligations and negotiated a new lease in good faith, I would treat them the same way I treated every other tenant. I told him that his employment and his family's financial stability were in the hands of his employer, not me, and that the most useful thing he could do today was go back to that office and have an honest conversation with his management about what was happening. I told him that was free advice, and probably the most genuinely useful thing any member of this family had offered any other member in over a decade. My father had not spoken for several minutes. He was looking at the deed document still sitting on the desk between us. He was a man who had spent his whole life believing that authority came from volume and from position, from the name on the lease and the name on the title, from the ability to threaten what someone stood to lose. He had walked into my clinic today carrying a threat he thought was loaded. He was sitting across from the person who actually held all of the ammunition, and she was not raising her voice. He picked up the deed document, looked at it once more, and set it back down. He told me that this was not how family was supposed to work. I told him he was right. It was not. I stood up. I thanked them for coming in. I told them my coordinator would see them out. I told my father that if he had questions about his office building once the acquisition closed, he was welcome to contact Solis Properties through the official property management line, same as any other tenant. I told my mother that I genuinely hoped she found some peace. I told my brother to take care of himself and to make good decisions for his family, because a baby deserved a parent who did that. I did not tell them to call me. I did not tell them the door was open. I did not perform a reconciliation I did not feel. I simply told them goodbye, and I meant it as a complete sentence. My coordinator led them through the lobby. I watched from the hallway. My father walked with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slightly forward, which was not how he had walked in. My mother kept her eyes down. My brother held the door for his wife, without saying anything. I went back to my office, sat down, and finished my espresso. That was last Tuesday. This is Thursday morning. My clinic opened at 9, all 12 rooms booked, 6-week waitlist holding steady. Last night I signed a letter of intent offering the 4th floor tenant, my brother's employer, a 6-month structured repayment agreement for their delinquent rent, combined with a new 2-year lease at current market rate, contingent on them coming current within 15 days. I structured it fairly because that is how I run my buildings. Their financial trouble is not my brother's fault, and 9 people's jobs should not be collateral in a family dispute I did not start. I also called my attorney yesterday afternoon and authorized the formal offer on the other acquisition building, the one where my father underwriters insurance from a month-to-month arrangement. Once the deal closes, I will send the standard new tenant welcome packet, the same as I send to everyone. Standard terms, market rate. No special treatment in either direction. People ask me sometimes how I stayed calm during conversations like the one last Tuesday. They want to know how I sit across from people who hurt me and speak in a level voice without either crying or screaming. The honest answer is that I spent years in therapy learning that the rage and the grief were real and valid and mine to feel, but that the moment of confrontation was not the place to spend them. The moment of confrontation is a business meeting. You bring documentation, you speak clearly, you let the facts do the heavy lifting. The grief I had already done. I did it in a therapist's office in Buckhead on Tuesday afternoons for 4 years. I did it on long runs along the Beltline at 6 in the morning when the city was still quiet and the feelings were too big to hold still for. I did it in journal entries I never showed anyone, and in long phone calls with friends who showed up for me in all the ways that family is supposed to. By the time my actual family walked through my door, I had already grieved them. I was not mourning in that consultation room. I was simply managing a situation. What I felt when they left was not sadness. It was the same thing I feel every time I walk through the front door of my building and see my name on the lease in the lobby directory. A clean, solid, unmistakable sense of having built something real on ground that nobody gave to me. The satisfaction of knowing that the people who told you that you would never make it without them are now, technically, your tenants. There is a version of this story where I extended them grace they had not earned and called it healing. I have watched other people tell that version, and I have nothing unkind to say about their choice. But I have also learned that grace without accountability is not generosity. It is just a different kind of self-abandonment. What I gave myself 10 years ago when I said no, and what I gave myself last Tuesday when I said no again, was the same thing both times. I chose myself, and everything you see followed from that. If you have ever been told that you are the problem in a family that has a problem, I want you to hear this directly. The role they assigned you was not a diagnosis. It was a convenience. You do not owe anyone a seat at a table you built alone. Your success does not belong to the people who predicted your failure. And the moment you stop needing their approval is not the moment you lose something. It is the moment you finally get to start. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from, and if you have ever had to walk away from family to walk toward yourself, I would really like to hear about it.